Captain Walker. I knew that he was a regular officer. I'd sussed that out because I was very keen on having a regular officer, because all officers are death or glory boys. That seems to be bred into them, to be death or glory boys. But the regular officers at least know what they're doing when they go in for death or glory exploits, and you have a fair chance of coming out of them alive. Whereas survival is the main theme of the lower decks life. And of course the survival is governed by whoever is the skipper, what he decides, and his skill and dexterity of extricating himself from any of these death or glory exploits is decided upon.
Well, he was the first man to really to create a really good escort group. I think it was a 36 escort group, and it was a combination of probably one destroyer, 2 frigates, and several flower-class corvettes. And we worked up so that more or less everyone knew his job, from ship to ship, escort duty. I think we had 6 kills, 3 in one convoy. We destroyed 1 U-boat by shell fire and ramming. We picked up a few, 4 or 5 survivors. We destroyed another U-boat by depth charges and picked up remains, bodies of German crew, the heart and lungs of a German U-boat sailor, which we took back aboard the Stork and was pickled in alcohol by the doctor. And when we arrived at Gibraltar, the captains of the convoy were invited aboard the Stork to view the remains. It gave the captains of the merchant fleet a bit of a boost to know that we were doing something about the U-boat attacks.
Another born leader of men, my view, born leader of men.
How did he differ from Mountbatten?
I should think he had more experience of seamanship, for one thing. See, Mountbatten was predominantly a long-service signal officer, wasn't he? I'm not saying he wasn't a good captain, but Walker had the experience. See, when the war broke out, he was on the shelf, as they call it, as a commander. And his first job was Admiral Ramsay and the evacuation of Dunkirk. Operation Dynamo. And he certainly knew anti-U-boat technique because he was a specialist. But he was a very, very direct man. Didn't suffer fools and like that. Tall and aggressive looking. I think I found out what he was going to be like before this convoy, straight to Gibraltar, which is going on. The dynamo went off the board because we lost power. Well, being a bit worried, I went on the bridge. We've lost power, so on the wire said, that's your job. That's all he said. So I nipped down below and tried to do something else. And he sent me the next day, he said, well, look, I'm not interested in what you're doing. I'm going to try and rely on you thoroughly. If you're in trouble, then, let me know what's going on. But I'm not interested in that, really. you're the expert and carry on with it. I thought, oh, well, you can do what you want now as long as you straight up with the old man. He was a very good leader, but he wanted you to do his job as well.
Of course, he had what we called in those days style. I think it's charisma now. But he definitely had personality. And I could never understand why he was passed over in peacetime. Because he was the definitive naval officer. Tall, commanding, as I say, with personality. But, and as far as we could see, very efficient indeed. But he was passed over in the promotion stakes after the war. And of course in peacetime, once you got passed over, that's where you stayed. There was no chance of you getting any promotion. It's only wartime. It's only a war that creates opportunities through obvious reasons for promotion. Flamboyant. He was a great one for, as most naval officers are, for signals. Witty or traditional signals. He was the first one to hoist General Chase, which was a flag signal from Nelson's day, meaning everybody in the flotilla or fleet to pursue the enemy. And he used to love going in with this signal fluttering from the yard arm. He had phrases he liked. One I can remember was never a dull moment. It's all part of life's rich pattern. Well, particularly when we've made a balls of attack, which we did. All very fair, very strict, very fair. And he was unsmiling if you were in front of him on a disciplinary charge, but of course it's difficult to say from the lower deck. You don't come into a lot of contact with the captain of a vessel. In fact, his officers don't come into contact to a great deal with him. He has a separate quarters from them, which is generally adjacent to the bridge, so that he can be up there as quickly as possible. It's generally immediately under the bridge. Their quarters are astern in the wardroom, on the quarterdeck. But inevitably, in his relaxed moments in the wardroom, he was the life and soul of the party. He could drink a pint of beer stood on his head. I don't know what relevance that has to it, but that was one of his party tricks. He was human.
From the day that Captain Walker joined the Stork, everything changed in the ship. So at sea, you saw quite a lot of him. He was always on the bridge, an active man, and he was a very likeable man and a very efficient man, and all the crew thought the world of him. Captain Walker was so keen that he used to take, particularly the Stork, and we used to practice boarding a British submarine off the Irish coast. Boarding it with the view, Captain Walker's ambition was to capture a U-boat intact and tow it back into Plymouth. So we used to practice this procedure, taking a U-boat in tow, boarding a submarine, putting a wire onto it, and so if it did happen that we ever could get one in tow, that was his ambition. I joined the Stork 1939, either a week before or a week after war was declared. The ship itself was 1,060 ton, I think, and we had 4-inch guns with .5 machine guns amidships, various Lewis guns throughout the ship, a couple on the bridge, and I think the top speed was about 18 to 20 knots. I think they were designed as ACAT cover for convoy duty as well as anti-submarine, a combination of the two. The seaman's quarters was very cramped. The air was bad. Everything was damp. The food was rough, but sometimes there was 6 inches of water in the foremast deck if we had bad weather. But apart from that, it was a good seagoing ship.
She had been a peacetime survey ship, a sloop. She was flat-bottomed with a shallow draft in order to go close inshore to make navigational sightings. So she was a swine at sea, of course, because she was never meant for Atlantic weather. She was definitely meant for coastal waters, where she could, because of her shallow draft, go close in to examine and make a correct survey of whatever area she was sent to do.
I was trainer on a B twin 4-inch. That's to train the gun from left to right, or port to starboard, with a gun's crew of about 12. Gun layer, trainer, captain of the gun, fuse setters, and loading numbers. The gun layer lays the gun on the target from overhead to water level, and the trainer goes from port to starboard. I was in communication with the director. He gave ranges and fuse settings. When one of the guns was under control of the director, it came through headphones, and the headphones was on the fuse setter, I believe. The captain of the gun actually fired the gun. He made the interceptor, and it was either fired from the director by electric circuit, or he could fire it by the gun layer, captain of the gun. Occasionally, if there was any breakdown of communications, then we had to go on to everything by hand, which was the training and firing from telescopes by the gun layer and the trainer.
There comes a certain stage when you become an able seaman, when you have to pick what is known as a non-sub rate, a non-substantive rate. And in those days it could be gunnery, torpedo, later radar, or ASDIC, anti-submarine work. And the anti-submarine part was considered to be the elite. I think it was because you had to have a rather higher standard of education to master not the intricacies of submarine detection so much, but the upkeep of the equipment, which was like a very sophisticated wireless set, as we called it in those days, and been able to trace faults in those circuits and, of course, repair them. And also, I'd heard that they got a very fine barracks at Portland, near Weymouth. And it was true when I got there, it was very true. There were beds instead of hammocks. and a very pleasant part of the country, Portland Bill.
Well, that was watch keeping mainly on the... see, I had a fairly good knowledge of short wave. Because in those days, shortwave is a very difficult thing to put up with. You know, you had very, very indistinct signals, and one had to pick out the signal coming in properly. And that was the main job we had, really. Decoding of signals as well, and coding.
Patience and determination, because you've got to stay with that target and not get depressed if you lose it, because there's always a routine for picking it up again. And also, Captain Walker was brilliant at determining what the U-boat commander decided to do. Well, sometimes I used to think they read the same manuals, the U-boat skippers and the Royal Navy officers as well, because they knew exactly, for some reason or other. But you see, you nearly invariably lost the submarine or the U-boat when you went over and attacked, because you dropped a pattern of depth charges which created havoc with your acoustics, and also gave you back false echoes. And of course that was when the U-boat commander made his evasive action under cover of the turbulence caused by the depth charges. And for some reason or other, I never fathomed this, what it got to do with submarines, they always went upwind. Now, what's that got to do with a submerged craft? I have no idea what the wind has got to do with it. But Captain Walker told us to do a search upwind, and invariably we redetected the target. And that this could go on several times with a clever U-boat commander, because he would vary his tactics, he would vary his depths, and at the early stages of the war we had no idea of the depth of the U-boat we were attacking. It was sheer guesswork. If you were in ASDIC racing, you realised that they were very efficient, very clever indeed at evading being destroyed. The ASDIC set sending out this high-frequency note known as a ping, which was caused by sending an electric impulse through a quartzo-electric a piezo quartz crystal suspended in a dome beneath the ship, which gave out this echo, this transmission. And the water, being a very good conductor of sound, was able to travel quite far, and if it impinged on anything solid, of anything solid, wrecks, whales, submarine, it would give you back an echo. And the skill was in diagnosing whether the echo was from a submarine or a whale or a shoal of fish. Wrecks were difficult, of course, except that they were static, but the sound was the same from a steel wreck as it would be from a submarine. Because a submarine would be moving and would give you a Doppler effect, so that the pitch of the note of the echo was different from that of the transmitted ping. And the great part of the skill of finally chasing and destroying a submarine was to analyse this Doppler effect. The change in the Doppler told you what the submarine was doing. If it was going away from you, the pitch was much lower. It was ping whop. If it was coming towards you, straight, it was much higher than pitch. And of course variations in that according to whether it was at what angle it was going away from you or approaching you. And it was analysing this difference in pitch, the Doppler effect, that was very important in finally destroying the U-boat. But later on we had a device called the Sword, which it was a slim transmitter, the same piezoelectric quartz, but you could move it in a vertical angle, whereas the ordinary ASDIC was in the horizontal plane. Right? And so you could tilt it backwards. And the angle it was at when you've got the echo, and combined with the range, which you got from your recorder, knowing the speed of sound through water, you could then work out the depth.
And what about a shoal of fish or even a whale?
Whale was very difficult indeed, because, as you probably know, they whistle. And it's very similar to the whistle of a hydroplane moving on a submarine. Very difficult indeed. The quality of the echo was the difference. It was slightly softer. You didn't get the metallic bing back from whale. And also normally its movement was slower, but we have attacked and dropped a pattern on a whale in mistake. But it is understandable, because obviously they move very similarly to a submarine, about the same speed when they're just cruising along underwater. The noises from them, and from many fish, is deceptive. Dolphins, porpoises, also make whistling noises, but whales in particular. All of them, we've seen them come up. The U-boat itself come up, generally stern first, and then dive down again. But you don't always accept that as a kill, because that's another ploy that they will do. You still chase after that one. Large amounts of oil, yes. But as I emphasise, large amounts of oil, because that's another ploy, release some oil. Large amounts of debris and human remains, once again I emphasise large, because they have been known to fire out dead bodies out of the torpedo tubes. So it was, we made certain it was large amounts of debris before we claimed a kill.
What kind of duties was Stork engaged on when you joined her in April 41?
Convoy escort, Atlantic convoys. I think we went to what is called 20 west, 20 degrees west. And it was purely escort duties. We went out, we escorted one out there, outward bound, and picked up a homeward bound and brought that back to Liverpool. We were based for a large part of the war, I'm happy to say, in Liverpool. Bootle, to be exact. We don't want to upset people's feelings. It was, no, I don't think it was ever boring on the Atlantic convoys, because if you didn't have the enemy to contend with, you had the sea. And we were in relatively small ships. Now, the smaller ones were the corvettes. I don't know what life was like on those. They were just glorified trawlers, corvettes were. But on a sloop, and I suppose on a destroyer as well, which were larger, but not all that large, the seas could be very frightening. The trough of the wave could hide the ship in front of you. It was deep enough to hide the ship in front of you. And it was like being on the helter-skelter. Exciting at first, but of course a bit wearying over a long period, keeping your balance. And of course, keeping your cutlery and your crockery intact and managing to be fed by the chefs who did a marvellous job, the cooks. It was the main theme that was hammered into us, that there was more danger of us being blockaded into surrender than being bombed or shelled or forced into surrender in any other way. Starvation will drive anybody to surrender, and that was constantly hammered into us. And we were given fairly correct details of our merchant ship losses to hammer this point home.
Because they were defenceless. They were a sitting ducks type of thing, and it was only the efficiency of the escorts that gave them any chance at all. U-boats at that day used to hunt in packs of 10, 14 at a time. And it was a very hard life for the merchant men. Ammunition ships, tankers, very rough.
No, it was the incessant pitching and rolling, and no ship is watertight, so the water gets everywhere. It's the wasp and the cold, but of course that is nothing compared with the Murmansk, the Russian convoys. The cold on there was something I would never have believed until I'd experienced it. Oh, that was hell. In every respect, the Aztec set was useless, because it was fresh water, mainly, from the glaciers in the Arctic, you see. So, the more polluted the water is, the better your sound wave travels. I don't mean pollution as we understand it today, but in a salty sea, the sound wave travels very well indeed, and the returning echo. But in pure water, it won't travel at all. So we had submarines coming up, U-boats coming up, 1,500 yards away from us that we never detected or heard. Not even heard them. Heard their engines, because that's sound and that won't travel through water. And they came up. Fortunately, most of them, well, nearly all of them, were as horrified as us and hurriedly dived. And got out of it. Because we ran in and attacked and dropped a pattern, but it was sheer guesswork based on where we'd seen them dive. Because we couldn't hear them.
So the Aztec was completely useless?
Yes, in fresh water and freshish water it is useless. The guns were frozen solid. And it is true that if you touch steel with your bare hand in those conditions, it will stick to it.
Convoy HG-76, which was a fairly big convoy. It was a convoy that was supposed to have broken the back of the U-boats. Well, this convoy left Jib in December 1941, and when we went to the convoy conference, we realised it's going to be a fairly big, important convoy, because the escort had been doubled by addition of other outlying escort vessels. I think there were about 32 ships involved in the convoy, and we had the first escort carrier, was the Audacity, a converted merchant ship. And I think the convoy lasted about 10 to 14 days. During that time we lost 2 merchant ships. The Audacity was sunk, and the American destroyer Stanley, which we, the 9-year release thing, and we shot down 4 Fokker-Wulfs, I think, and killed 4 U-boats.
We attacked a U-boat in conjunction with a flower cask corvette, and Captain Walker described it as a copybook attack, that something they learnt at Aztec school. The first pattern of charges was slightly too deep, and this next pattern destroyed the U-boat. The U-boat exploded under the sea. Terrific explosion. And there was no survivors. We picked up part of a stretch and found a sheepskin coat, rubber trousers, and the heart and lungs of German sailor. These parts was pickled by the ship's doctor and taken to Gibraltar, where they were viewed by the captains of merchant fleet.
Now, one of the big kills there was done by the Stork, our ship. The U-boat that had sunk the Stanley was astern of us, and our Captain Walker had a very special U-boat depth charge operation called Operation Buttercup, where they released all their depth charge astern. Immediately, as soon as you got a contact, they dropped all the depth charge and then carried out the normal attack. And the Stanley had just been torpedoed. We carried on the counter-attack. And it took us about half an hour, I suppose. And the Stork and the U-boat, U-574, were going round in ever-diminishing circles. We couldn't use any guns because they were too near to depress the guns. The first lieutenant did use a strip Lewis gun.
Captain Walker was very much his own eccentric techniques. Yeah. I think the most well-known one was the Buttercup attack, whereas when we got a very cunning adversary, he used to line up whatever ships he had available, line abreast, and they would go forward at a reasonable speed and just plaster the area with depth charges, generally set deep, because normally if we got to that stage the U-boat had decided the safest place was to go deep, and the U-boats could go rather deeper than we thought at the time. Actually, they were very well constructed, but the idea was to plaster like an artillery plastering of the area, but all going forward and dropping a carpet of, in other words, spraying the sea with a Buttercup of depth charges. That was his favourite.
I opened fire on U-boat. Actually, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and we'd had several skirmishes with U-boats, depth charging and star shell firing, and we was in communication with a Stanley, which was American 4-funnelled destroyer, part of the Lend and Lease programme. She was in contact with a U-boat, and the U-boat had fired torpedoes. The next minute the Stanley exploded, and she'd caught 2 torpedoes and was destroyed in seconds. The other 2 torpedoes passed to our stern, and we circled round behind the Stanley and picked up the echo of the U-boat. We attacked the U-boat with several patterns of depth charges. The U-boat came to the surface, and we followed it round in 2 or 3 circles, it turning inside our circle. The .5 machine gunner amidships opened fire on the U-boat, which was too close for us to get at, kind of thing. Opened fire on the U-boat, and everybody was diving with cover. There was .5 bullets ricocheting all over the place. We then drew to port or starboard and opened fire on the U-boat. I think 1 hit was recorded, and by this time Captain Walker announced stand by to ram. The crew took appropriate action, and we rammed the U-boat amidships. The U-boat rolled over under the Stork partly lifting the Stork out of the water as we overrode her. We pushed 12 foot of the bows back of the Stork, but hauled the U-boat. The U-boat then came out of the water in a vertical position, with about 20 of the U-boat in the air, stood out vertical, with the U-boat survivors jumping out, screaming and shouting and hauling lifebelts. But anyway, we did pick up, I think it was 6 survivors from the U-boats.
And we rescued 4 German sailors, and they came back on the Stork. There's one thing where I helped one of the U-boat sailors up the scrambling net, and he spat at me. And the next night, after this had gone, the Deptford rammed us by mistake, thought we were a U-boat. And it's always amazed me, apparently 2 of those 4 U-boat sailors were SS men. I believe they used to carry SS men in the ships, and they were lost. Because this Deptford went into the cabin where they were prisoners. The 2 ordinary lads were saved, but the SS fellows went, which is most unusual, really.
We were rammed by the Deptford through the quarterdeck, killing 2 of the U-boat survivors. Captain Walker came back to look at the damage and immediately fell through the hole in the quarterdeck among the remains of the Germans. He was dragged out and none the worse for his experience. But by this time the Stork was in a bit of a state, with 12 foot of the bows pushed back, and now a great gash in the quarterdeck.
Well, we took a convoy out from Lockhew. We took a Stork convoy out all the way down to Algiers. On the way out, just before we got to Algiers, we attacked a U-boat that was attacking the Rodney. And I think on that occasion we messed our ASDICs up. So the ASDIC was stuck to the dome. And that night we were torpedoed off Algiers. Well, I think there were 2 fired. One hit forward and blew the bows off, and the other one aft didn't go off. Well, I thought we were in collision at first, because I was more or less asleep and a bit tired. Made a mess of the bow, though. Heck of a mess. But nobody was hurt. We got back to Algiers, went into dock there, and I felt worse off there than at sea because we were torpedoed. We were dive-bombed every minute. It was the beginning of the operation, you see.
We were torpedoed in the Bay of Algiers by German U-boat. Several ships going backwards and forwards across the mouth of the Bay of Algiers, protect the convoy which was laid inside. And about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning we picked up an echo as a U-boat on the surface, close inshore, and we turned out a line to investigate this, and were torpedoed, which destroyed the fork of the ship. Fortunately, again, no one was killed. The paint shop got on fire, and the crew's quarters forward was more or less destroyed. We went into Algiers next morning, and we were patched up by the French dockyard people who made a makeshift repairs to get us to Gibraltar, and our own people strengthened the job, and we eventually made our way back to nearest port in England, which was Falmouth. By this time the ship was nearly falling in half. It was. The shock of the explosion had compressed the ship, and although they'd welded steel girders across the damage, it was a very rough trip, and the whole of the crew's quarters was flooded and everything wet. Food was bad, and it was a long, slow journey on our own back to England. The ship was repaired, and it became a fishery protection vessel after the war. Very strong and seaworthy ship.